What I want to do briefly, and you'll have to forgive me, my knees are cooked, so one of them is being replaced in December, and we're targeting dates first quarter next year to replace the other one. And all I can say is it's heck to get old. So we'll just leave it at that. What I wanted to share as we were planning the conference and talking to Kiwi, we talked about her presentation, and really it's, as I'm sure you all know, a lot of it has to do with donor recruitment, identifying our donors, right? How do we engage them? And I think that comes down to what are we asking them to do? And then more importantly, I think it's important if you want them to come back year after year, how do we, as Kiwi said, how do we turn them into volunteers so that they love the organization, and this is really going to be, their charity, if you will, of choice. So as she was explaining her program, I thought about my own personal experience with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So we thought we would just take, 25 minutes maybe or so here before lunch. I could share some things that hopefully will reinforce some of the knowledge points from this morning. As Kiwi says, she's going to be here till noon. So we'll get through it relatively quickly as we can. And if you have additional questions of me, you can certainly ask, but more importantly, we may have a time for a few more questions before she has to go. And are you quarantining the holiday candy from everyone, or?
Hey, if anybody's got any Smarties, let me know.
Okay. Did everybody get that? We're on the lookout for Smarties. So if you have Smarties in your purse, your backpack, your briefcase, please see her before she leaves. I guess the way to begin the story is just, it won't take but a second here, but really to kind of share with you the journey. As Mary mentioned, I am a 2-time survivor of blood cancers, a 3-time cancer survivor overall. I thank my lucky stars every day because I get to play on the house's money. Because the first diagnosis came in '96, the second one came 14 years later, which I thought was grossly unfair, because if it had been gone that long, it's not really, allowed to come back. I happened to be on one Saturday morning in a board meeting when a young man announced, our board chair that year had an approach prior to starting every board meeting to go around and ask everybody to sort of share a mission moment or a story, something you're happy or grateful for. And my fellow board member made mention that he was participating in LLS's Man Woman of the Year fundraiser. And if anyone would be interested in supporting his campaign, see him at the break, and he would give you the information to his personal fundraising page and these types of things. Man, Woman of the Year, just to give you a real thumbnail quick, we select community leaders, a certain number of women, a certain number of men. For every dollar that you raise, it counts as a vote to win the ultimate prize, either to be named the Man or Woman of the Year. You recruit your own cabinet, i.e. those friends and peers that are going to help you raise money, and so on. So I walked up to him at the break and said, how can I help, your campaign? And I shared just a few comments about being a survivor. This is the first thing I want to emphasize that was shared with us this morning. He didn't thank me for my interest. He informed me why he was involved. He shared with me why it was important to support him. And I walked away, having worked 35 years with nonprofits, and I said, my goodness, LLS must have given this guy an awful lot of information and scripted him very, very well. Because I'm not talking to a staff member, I'm talking to a volunteer. Most importantly, I'm talking to a peer. Now, how did I get involved? Ultimately, from that interaction, this is who LLS is, our mission statement. I'm going to be talking specifically about Light the Night, which is one of their fall fundraisers. This is why I got involved. A peer asked me to get involved. Now, we've been talking at dinner last night and on breaks this morning. We sort of ended our discussion here this morning about the use of social media, print media, and so on and so forth. I will tell you, and I don't believe this is an exaggeration, I have associates here in the room, but when it comes to events, fundraisers, sponsorships, donations, I probably get 10, maybe 15 pieces of mail a week. No disrespect to anybody who's doing this. I know this is a tried and true approach, but it's a little hard when you're getting asked that many times. And I know that's a little unique because of who I am and what I do for the firm. But I get letters from organizations I don't even know, and I'm being asked, you know, in writing, and the signature on the page I don't recognize. So it becomes that, you know, how do I spend my personal money, but more importantly, what do I recommend to, you know, the powers that be? I've lost count of how many partners I have now, but, you know, we have a protocol, you know, and there has to be, you know, a reason to support, you know, the particular cause and the ask. So I can only emphasize from my own personal experience, if you can engage your volunteer fundraisers in a well-organized, defined timeline and laid out process, which I'm going to describe, and if you can aspire or get to that level where it's a peer-on-peer ask, I think that's incredibly effective. I've seen it work wonders, and I've always felt LLS does a great job in how they manage and prepare their volunteers. You know, and the proof is in the pudding. I mean, we do, nationally, they're a national organization, so right up front I'll tell you they have, you know, national level resources as far as websites and print materials and stuff, but the money that is raised here in our community is raised basically entirely by volunteers, and the office presence in this market, we have 3 people. 3 people. So I want to stress that, because the first thing I don't want you to think is, oh, well, this is, you know, like the American Cancer Society or the American Heart, you know, Association. They got 100 staff people to do all this. They don't. We have 3 people. And we raise several thousands of dollars, you know, in the Man Woman of the Year event, and we do a walk in the fall. The walk itself is less than a mile, or just slightly over a mile, you know, and we're able to raise an incredible amount of money, you know, to help fight and hopefully someday find a cure for blood cancer. And it is all done entirely through volunteers. And it takes a tremendous amount of coordination. So I would say what our team internally here in Dayton does is they support their volunteer fundraisers, make it easy for us to make the ask. They leverage our relationships, and it's really more they're there to support us and to make us effective than we are there to provide them with lists of names and, you know, ideas so that they can go out and raise all the money. I'll kind of make a correlation here because, you know, we work with over 120, I think, public charities. I don't want to embarrass anybody, so I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many in the room right now would like, particularly what you learned on this morning, see a way, and this is the show of hands, and I'm not going to embarrass any board members, but by a show of hands, if you take some of the things that were shared with you this morning, do you think you could put together a process, and obviously it's going to be scalable depending on the size of your organization, to do, if not to do anything else, do you think you might be able to enhance the effectiveness of your board members at raising money? Show of hands. And the only reason I ask that is because that's, when it comes to fundraising, we hear that over and over from the execs that we work with. I wish I could engage my board more and they would be more effective at raising money. So I think hopefully this morning you saw some tools and some strategies that might make that happen. So why did I get involved? A peer asked. How did they recruit me? All right, very simple. I told him on that Saturday morning that I wanted to help him. It was mentioned, well actually I think I was made fun of this morning about my eclectic taste in music. I actually recall I donated 2 framed lithographs. One of them was of Jimi Hendrix setting his guitar on fire at the Monterey Pop Festival. So if there's any 70s era hippies in the room like me, you might remember that. For the rest of you, you can just disregard the comment altogether. But I donated a couple pieces of art for his silent auction, and I wrote him a check. I went out on the web and made a donation. Here's how I say that I was recruited. He not only sparked my interest, but he took the time to understand my connection. This guy's a 3-time cancer survivor. You don't meet too many of those, not something I'm bragging about, but he went back and informed the team at the Tri-State chapter, and out of the blue, a couple of weeks after the Man Woman of the Year event, I got a phone call. It was the local rep for LLS, and she wanted to take me to lunch. So I met her for lunch up off of Miller Lane. This is where I say this, there's an art and a process. And I'm an auditor, so I'm all about process, okay? 15-minute increments, I schedule my entire life and, the whole thing. I met with Karen, and Karen said, thank you for supporting, the event and supporting the candidate. He shared with us your story. So it goes back to who do you want to ask to be involved? Well, if you're trying to cure a blood cancer, someone who's made that journey not once but twice, well, again, we go back to feelings. There's an immediate emotional connection there. These people saved my life. I've got every reason in the world to be involved. So she, thinking that, since I supported the Man Woman of the Year, that I might be interested in being involved in that fundraiser. In about the first 90 seconds, she explained that happens between January and around May. I said, I am a CPA, so that's a no-go. What impressed me more importantly, she said, fine. She goes, I'd like to share with you some information about Light the Night and how you, Mr. Donor, could help us end cancer so no one has to go through what you did. And she pulled out we put one nice folder of information aside. I had the second one. Long story short, before I left lunch, I said if I can get my partners to commit to it, we will not only be involved and have a walk team, but I will personally be involved in your executive challenge, and that's where you have certain individuals who will do their own personal campaign to raise money. And if my partners agree, we'll sponsor the 2016 walk. So My message to all of you is if you take the time, and no offense to the written letter, you can't make that connection with a form letter. And if I get 15 of them a week, I will tell you, other than the signature and a few strategically placed commas or semicolons, it's the same doggone letter. I think you guys just go out on Google and download them, and it's just, here's your standard ask letter, and we don't even take the time to customize the letter. So this is how they, recruited me. So again, I always have told, I was interested. I became a volunteer, not because I had an agenda or a desire to push it. I became a volunteer because they knew what they were doing and what it took to recruit me to be involved in their cause. Here we go. They learned my story. They learned my story. So when you're meeting with those prospective donors, how many of you do most of the talking? Let's be honest. I see a few people saying no, but I see some people who aren't raising hands or indicating one way or the other. What are we focused with? We want to get to the point about, here's why we're good, here's what we do, here's the reason you should get your checkbook out right now, and give me your mortgage payment for next month. The bank can wait, because you're all hardwired, and I'm not saying this to be critical, you're hardwired to share your story, and the good work that you're doing. I've had some people, I've served on some boards, and some people raise their eyebrows when we talk about fundraisers, particularly events and everything, and I'm known as, Daddy Downer, the bean counter in the room, but I'm the one that says, these sponsorship ideas and everything are great, but as a business owner, what's in it for me? And I get looked at like I've got three horns because we do all this great work. Sort of like, how dare you ask what you as a donor get out of this? We talked about real world. That's real world. If you want your corporate donors, and I'm speaking entirely from a business perspective, not those friends and family, the individual donor thing, you got to inspire me, you got to turn me into your spokesperson, and then I got to go inside the firm and convince, 25 partners, depending on what day of the week it is, that this is something we should get behind. So don't overlook the fact that you need to be able to articulate, and in the case of LLS with Like the Night, there's print media, there's social media exposure, your name ends up on the t-shirts and things like that. And for business owners, I will tell you that's important. Because what we want is to further our visibility in the community that we're a good corporate citizen. And if anyone thinks that's a little self-serving, in order for us to, write that check, all I can tell you is I've been doing this for 35 years and I figured out a long time ago that's the way the world works, So when you have that meeting, be able to not only speak to why we should be involved in the outcomes and effectiveness of your program, but be prepared to articulate what's in it for that corporate donor or even that individual donor. Because again, if you treat us right and you help us fall in love with you, we'll come back year after year. And I can say not only myself, but our firm has been a supporter of LLS since someone took the time to pass my name along. We talked about how do you inspire your donors? How do you keep them engaged all year long? As soon as I said that I was in for the walk, I was contacted, and again, you may not have some of these resources, I'm just using them as an example. I was contacted and asked, and raise your hand, whoever said we hate usernames and passwords. All right, well, Paul, I got to tell you, I'm sorry to say, one of the first things I had to do was I was invited to sign up on their website to get their information, and yes, I had to come up with a username and a password. But the most important thing is as soon as they had sparked my interest, they began sharing information with me, not only about research and things that was being done to find a cure, more importantly, information about the walk that I had volunteered to be a part of. And it wasn't overly, aggressive. It was, they weren't asks for money. They were sharing knowledge. And if you think about my opening remarks, the gentleman who recruited me, who started this ball rolling, he was well equipped with knowledge to share with me about the organization. What was powerful, he ain't on the payroll. So think about peer-to-peer. Think about when you, even just your own relationships with family. If you sit there, if my brother tells me, buying this particular product is a great thing for me to do for myself and my family, that carries a whole lot more weight than if I'm on the showroom floor and it's an automobile, for example, and the salesman is trying to sell me. So again, I'm a big believer in peer-on-peer. So here we started providing information. Then I was asked to join, and this is where it kind of gets into to the brass tacks. I was asked to become part of the executive committee for the walk. And I'm going to keep saying over and over the peer-to-peer model. And I've participated on that committee now for 3 years, ever since I first got introduced. And this is a group of individuals that have been targeted, recruited, so that we have the right folks in the room. And our purpose really is to help identify and recruit others to join us in the cause. So rather than, someone had mentioned, rather than I give you a list of individuals that you can go and talk to, we've empowered a team that's going to go out and make the asks on our behalf. And again, I don't know how many in the room, I've been asked to do this on boards. Can you give me a list of 20 other business owners that you know? And then I provide the list, and then the staff goes out and tries to set up appointments with these people. You all run into gatekeepers. And I may give you 20 names, and you might get one meeting. This past year, for the walk, well, let me hold that thought, but I'm going to share with you some numbers of how we made connections and had a success rate far beyond that 1 or 2 out of 20 names. Here's what they asked me to do. Here's usually what we ask most of the business owners to do. Form a walk team, personally fundraise for the event through the executive challenge. My unique case, they asked me to share my story. And I would like to think that sharing my story, and asking others, to join the fight, I think that's, and our director, Chris Peterson, is in the room here. I think she came to make sure I didn't lie or stretch the truth on anything. But I think just sharing my story and saying, this is why I'm involved, will you be involved? If you have that personal relationship already, it's kind of hard to say no. And is this the animal shelter group? Right here. Respectfully, that's like when Sarah McLachlan comes on with the abused dogs, I change the channel. Because if I don't, number one, I'll cry, and then number two, I'll get my credit card out every time I see the commercial, and I'll send them money, and I'm trying to get a couple of millennials out from under their student debt. The biggest one is the final bullet point. They asked me to recruit other fundraisers. So I like to call our model affectionately, and don't get mad at me, Chris, this is kind of the Amway of fundraising, okay? We're going to get you engaged, then we want you to invite 10 of your closest friends to get engaged, and then we want all 10 of them to invite 10 people to get engaged, and I think you all see where I'm going with this. It's a pretty powerful way to raising money because we're not relying on form letters, and we're asking Bob to ask his business acquaintances, his family members, and his friends to get involved. And it's always harder to say no to someone we know and respect, and I'm going to assume most of them respect me. They at least would listen to me. And it's personal. It's that personal thing. So you're applying to their feelings, to their sense of doing something for the greater good. And all I can tell you is it really works. How did they support us? Well, again, national charities, so you can take some of these with, you have to take them in context. But the biggest thing is they supplied us. They've got it down to an art that if we're going to use email, and we leverage social media quite a bit, if we're going to use email to send to your list, the 10 folks or whatever you said you would ask to be involved, they sent me not only help me organize, because I'm 62 almost, so I know that groups in Outlook exist. I'm not necessarily sure I'm the greatest at creating the group in Outlook. So they can send me my group. They can give me step-by-step instructions. How do you put this in Outlook? Here's how you do a mass posting in LinkedIn or Facebook. But I'll tell you what the kicker is. They give me the script. I didn't have to think of what to say. They gave me the script. They're giving me all this knowledge and information to raise my knowledge level and my awareness of them as an organization. So I'm going to tell you that while I'm a volunteer and a donor, I think really what their approach is, when we get back to loving the organization, they are turning their volunteers not only into fundraisers, but into advocates. Advocates for change, advocates for a cure. And that stuff just doesn't happen happenstance. And again, I'm an auditor, so I like all of this because it's a process. Yes, I'm the one that, it's even like Brady Ware's conference, but I'm the one that's still over here checking off, the stuff on the agenda. That's what CPAs do. They maintain a timeline, they give you feedback. There's a peer-on-peer competitive feel to it within the executive committee, and hey, it might not be, the purest of reasons, but I can tell you most of us in business, most of us by nature, if you're in a group and you're all tasked to do the same thing, we're human beings. We like to know, am I doing as good as the next person? So when the weekly tally comes out, if you're in the top 3, there's a little bit of bragging rights and feel good associated with that, and I don't think you need to be ashamed of it. If anything, it motivates them to do more. So that's a big key of the executive challenge. We have a little peer-on-peer competition. And I don't know, Chris, if you know the location, but one thing I take great pride in, I finished in the executive challenge, I finished number 3 in fundraising for the last 3 years, and I get my ugly mug on a billboard somewhere in Dayton. So how do you think your donor? I mean, I'm like large and in charge, as far as the visibility of being recognized for doing this. And it's my picture, it mentions Brady Ware, and it's a feel-good. And that kind of recognition makes me say they appreciate what I'm doing, look at what they're doing here to call attention to this. And you know what? We got a bunch of witnesses, Chris. Barring any unforeseen circumstances, I'll be back next year. Collateral materials, We've covered those. Here we go, recognition of the top fundraisers, the follow-up. And the important thing about the follow-up, I mean, we always get our executive group together after the walk to celebrate, to debrief, you know, to share the results of the walk and how we did. You know, so we take that, you know, so again, we talked about the ask, you know, the task, you know, then we report. We use that same model. I mean, we start planning early in the year. One of the things you might want to consider that I've felt, and here's where I'm going to share some statistics with you. Prior to the walk, sometime late spring, as getting ready for the walk, we take our executive committee, as I described, and we identify those 15, 20, if you will, individuals that, you know, we're going to ask to get engaged and do what we do. LLS hosts what we call a corporate recruitment event. And again, I'm talking about how we recruit businesses and business leaders. I don't recall specifically, but the ask this year was, can you everybody give us 30 names? I think most of the executive committee got somewhere between 20 and 30. I don't know that we all hit the target. So I'm going to tell you, let's just say we had 10 people doing this. And they all came up with 30 names and made an ask. You know, and I think that's 300 even without my calculator. So 300 asks went out. At that corporate recruitment event where we want to share information and engage potential people to join us, you know, in support of the walk, I believe, Chris, if I'm not mistaken, we had approximately 100 show up. Now, I don't know what your open rates are on your email. I don't know what kind of response you're getting to your form letters. We asked 300 people and had a 33% participation rate. I'm not a social media genius, but I think that's like way over the top on what most of these kinds of things would happen.
Can I just add, it was also the week of the tornadoes.
Yeah, and that's true. It was the Friday after the tornado.
The tornadoes was pretty
And as I further, a little tidbit of information, as I recall, on Thursday morning, we were still wondering whether or not the Racquet Club would have water and could actually feed the 100 people that were going to show up. But we had 100 people showed up. And not everyone responds, but I would say we had easily more than 50% of the guests did something. At a minimum, they wrote a check. Most of them wrote a check or had a walk team. So now our walk teams are 10 people, and the expectation for them, and I think you need to set expectations, is we want each walker to raise $100, and then we tie the recognition and the thank you to achieving that milestone. And all I can share with you really here is it works, and the information that was shared with you this morning, if you go back and look at this and take the time to develop that timeline, you know, and really to give serious thought to, you know, who could help spread not only the word about the good work that you do, but they have, you know, they're a center of influence, they have a circle, you know, and how do you leverage their passion and turn it into action to you know, create passion in others, you know, and again, it's the old pyramid Amway thing, you know. If we can have 10 this year and that becomes 20 next year and it becomes 100 the year after, and more importantly, we thank them, we reward them, and we keep them engaged all year, I think you end up with a pretty powerful fundraising model. And I think the place all of you could start, you know, down that would be to maybe just invest the time, you know, in working with your board, you know, raising the bar on your board, you know, test drive it there first, you know. And then after that first golf outing, you know, or vaccination clinic. By the way, I used to be a treasurer of the no-kill shelter in Richmond, so I've enjoyed your shelter comments. My wife still wants to volunteer to walk dogs, but I'm not in support of that because she'll just walk them from the shelter directly into my house. And we're downsizing, so we have fewer animals now. But I think that's really, kind of the place, you start. And we just wanted to take a minute to kind of share this story, and hopefully, you've been able to see some of the connections about what LLS is doing compared to, what was shared with you this morning. And I'm going to give you the proof in the pudding. This is the model, this is what we use, and the Tri-State chapter encompasses Dayton, and we have an office and a presence in the Cincinnati market. Chris can correct me if I'm mistaken here, but on a walk, and I always describe it this way, we do a walk in Dayton, we do a walk, in Cincinnati, but on the Dayton walk, it's at nighttime. If you've never been, it's incredibly inspiring because, there's some certain, flair to the event. We not only recognize those that are on their journey to recovery, but we pay recognition to the people that they're walking in support of a loved one, and we honor those who've lost their fight. We hold it at the phrase. So the walk itself is an easy walk, and it's a mile, So it's not like a 5K, and you got to organize all the runners. It's really a very uplifting event. And through this model of engaging the business community, and we have certain process and system in where we engage friends and family teams. We continue to keep the websites open through the end of the year, so we're still actively raising money for the walk that happened, towards the end of September. But I'm very proud to say that, with respect to achieving our mission, we've raised well in excess of $350,000. And so for those of you in the room, I'm sure there are some in here that would think if we could raise $50,000 from a walk, think of the difference. So I would encourage you to explore, Kiwi's website, look at her materials, the books she's written, because there is a lot of power in this kind of approach. And even if you're still using Excel, there's ways that you can track it. We got social media such that, you can get desktop publishers and create your own communication pieces, but if you can find that core group of individuals that share your passion for your mission, and if you train them, you inspire them, you support them, this peer-on-peer approach can have incredible results. And I thank you for listening. And let me see, it's only 11:35, so I'll answer questions, or Chris is here. Will you answer questions? She says she will help answer questions. And we have this wonderful individual over here for another 30 minutes. So I will not be offended if you want to skip me and just ask her more questions. Yes, ma'am.
How far into your journey from your initial donation were you tagged, so to speak, or asked to then become a volunteer fundraiser for them? I mean, was it over a period of, you became a donor and became interested for a year? Or was it?
Great question. Everybody hear that? How far along the continuum before I got the big ask, to be a volunteer fundraiser? The initial ask, as I said over lunch, the initial ask, given my story and the fact that I'm a business owner, or at least 8.39% of a business owner, or something like that, the initial ask was for, would I agree to chair the walk, and would Brady Ware agree to be a corporate sponsor for the event? So if we want to break it down into its elements, the initial ask was to be a sponsor. And then once we move down that path, then again, part of the engagement, in the materials and things that they provided about the walk, they said, check into the section on the executive challenge. We'd really love it if you would consider being part of the executive challenge, where they put up a fundraising page for me and I go out and ask my friends and family members and stuff to go to my fundraising page and raise money. And then as far as identifying other donors, I would say, while I did some of that the first year on the executive committee, and I think Chris would agree, years 2, 3, and now going into year 4, I've become much more effective at that, because in 17, I identified 10 people or 12 people. In 18, it was 20 different people. This year, it was 30 different people. And that's where I really see the power. And more importantly, if you, like we heard this morning, if you engage me and keep me engaged, then just my reach becomes exponential over the years.
So then, in a more personal question, as a donor, you obviously have a very personal, real connection to this organization.
Yep.
Have there been other organizations that you haven't had that deep of a connection with that have had an impact on you to compel you to invest in and take ownership of an organization like you did this one?
If everyone heard that, obviously as a cancer survivor, it's not a big stretch for me to be a fan of an organization trying to end cancer. The question up here was, has there been other organizations where I volunteer that have created this similar passion? And sitting in the back of the room here is our new executive director, Tamara, from the United Way in Richmond, Indiana. I work in Dayton. I live in Richmond. And I have served our local United Way there. We have, 2 3-year terms and you have to roll off. So in total, over my career, I've served on that board for 12 years. I've chaired the board twice. This year, I'm the assistant campaign chair, and last year, I was the annual campaign chairperson in my local community. And I'll tell you what inspired me there is not to, again, be a daddy downer here, so to speak, but if you look at Wayne County and southeast Indiana, I mean, half our kids or more live below the poverty line. Not bragging here, but I've lost count of how many boards I've been on. We were chatting at dinner last night. Sometimes, like most board members, you get frustrated, things don't move quickly enough, or you're being asked to do 1,000 different things. One of my partners made the comment, and it sounded a little too much like my wife, in that, yeah, they were telling Kiwi Bob will complain sometimes, but he'll always come through, and his biggest problem is he doesn't know how to say no. And there is a little bit of truth to that. I've been a very active volunteer for a lot of organizations, but specifically, I would say United Way, similar to LLS, they rely quite heavily on their board and their volunteers to raise money, I take that level of commitment very seriously. And I'll tell you right now, the single thing, and I know you've probably heard it at 1,000 different sessions like these, if your board, now some boards we set, I've been on boards where we set expectations as far as the dollar amount, okay? I'm not here to lobby for that one way or the other, but if every single member of your board is not making a gift annually that is at least substantial to them, you've got a major problem raising money in the community. You got a problem raising money as far as grants go. You got a problem raising money and getting money from United Way and other funders, because you know what? Part of being a board member is making that annual gift towards the mission. So if your board isn't fully engaged, and we don't know each other, and I don't have that same kind of LLS connection, I can tell you right now, it's probably 99.5%. I'll never write you a check. I mean, you guys got to believe in yourself. And again, I'm not an advocate for fixed dollar amounts because not everybody has the same giving capacity. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask, I heard you mention earlier, like when you're going out and trying to get people to donate, you want people who have the experience in what you're trying, or what your cause is, right? What happens if the cause that you are moving for is not readily embraced by the community? And then you go to ask people for fundraising. Do I still stay with those who have experienced what my cause is, or do I step outside to get those who are concerned about people?
Well, a great question, and I know that we live in a time right now where a great deal of divisiveness, you know, in particular around, you know, social issues and social causes. So your mission, and I think Kiwi said it best this morning, she was very direct. There are a lot of people, unfortunately, regardless of the work that you're doing and the change that you're trying to facilitate in our community or the world, there are a lot of people, frankly, that don't care, and they don't share your point of view. I think part of this process approach, as she described, is you need to identify the people who do. And then I think what you do with them is much like LLS, what you are asking them to do then is to attract other like-minded, you know, individuals. And there certainly can be causes out there that are extreme, either to the right or to the left. We don't want to make this a political discussion. And depending on the severity of that, and I think most like grassroots advocacy organizations kind of start this way, I think you got to get a core loyal group of folks that are willing to spend time, talent, and whatever treasure they can. And your communication, quite frankly, and maybe there's a continuum here, and I don't know if you'd like to speak to this. If you're an emerging social issue, I think what you have to do first is articulate, you know, what your mission is, what your desired outcomes are, you know, and there's going to become a piece of this where you've got to educate the world around you, why you exist, you know, and what you're there to do. And then hopefully as part of that community-wide, you know, engagement, you know, and advocacy type of work, I would think over time what I've witnessed is you'll begin to identify other people who have a passion about that issue, and that's how you start. Yeah, because if it's a real controversial issue, you know, if that's where you're going, I mean, I can walk in and before I get to ask for money, they could very easily show me the door. You know, I don't even want you here. So I think part of it is, again, we're talking communication, and I don't think they exist in separate vacuums. I think communication with the community about your mission, your outcomes, why do you exist? You know, why is this important? Can you articulate the change you want to make in the world? You've got to educate the community. And then when we're talking about inspiring these fundraising volunteers, I think some of that may come just through that overall education process, because I am pretty convinced at the end of the day, even if I want to raise money for you and nobody in town knows who you even are, that's a monumental, I think, it would be a monumental uphill climb. So I think this communication, you know, one is educational and information, and then the other is empowering your volunteers to raise money. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'll just add on that question. You know, sometimes you can almost think too small about your specific issue, and I would encourage you to think a little bit bigger. When I first moved to rural North Carolina and got to know the nonprofits in our little town. I did some little training, got to meet a lot of people. Everybody, once they realized I did communications and fundraising, I got like 15 offers to be on the board, right? So I decided I was going to pick one. And the one I picked was the HIV/AIDS case management organization in our town. I don't have HIV. I know some people that have it, but that really wasn't what motivated me, honestly, to say yes to her. What motivated me was she said, the executive director, said, you know, I go around this town and get the door slammed in my face every day because I'm dealing with a clientele that people don't like for whatever reason. Some of them are poor, some of them are drug users, some of them have sexual preferences that some of the people in this town don't like. That's why I got on the board, is because she was the underdog in town, and I love a good nonprofit fight. So when she told me about all the bias in the town and how she was getting the door slammed in her face because of all the stigma and the bias, I'm like, let's go, girl. And so I got on her board. So I don't know what your issue is or what it is, but I would say don't think too small. Maybe think a little bit bigger about the kinds of people and the kinds of fight that people might be willing to fight with you, and see if you can find some of those people. And then, like Bob said, educate them so they have that specific information about your cause and can speak about it accurately in the world. You'll find your fighters. You'll find your people.
And I think you don't have to have cancer to support an organization, or don't have to have whatever disease it is. You just have to be compassionate about what that nonprofit does. You don't have to have
That's an excellent point. Not every member of our executive committee is a survivor, and a lot of them, to my knowledge, a lot of them, although it is kind of hard not to run into very many individuals who don't know someone who's had a cancer, but you know, they're not survivors. Nobody in their immediate family has been touched. You know, and everyone comes at it from a different angle. Mine is, I feel on a certain level a responsibility to give back. I don't take it for granted. I think the research that organization does saved my life twice, so I don't lose sight of that. But just think of, and I'll share this because to your point, I've been on the ward, you know, where it's quarantined and you have the 4- and 5-year-old bald-headed kids who are suffering from leukemia, and respectfully to my shelter friends here, there are two things in the Reynolds household. When St. Jude commercials come on, you change the channel, or this 6'3", you know, big guy who played offensive line is going to cry like a baby, and it's the St. Jude's and the Sarah McLachlan with the abused dogs, you know. So that comes back to that, you know, it's compassion. And what we did, and I kind of didn't touch on this, but this year's corporate recruitment event, the purpose of that event is to try to find sponsors, executive committee members, people who do the executive challenge, and we're targeting the business community. So when we had that pre-event to do the recruitment, how LLS helped us on the committee is I asked you, you know, will you come to breakfast and be a guest of mine at this table? I'm involved with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. They do great work, and I would like you to come and learn more about the effects of cancer in the workplace. I didn't ask you for money, but I'm going to guarantee you with the interest cards at the end of the day, the majority of my guests were all in. And again, thinking about what's in it for the donor, I'm a business owner. It's a business-related topic if you get into the statistics of the absenteeism, you know, not only for the person who's suffering the disease, but the caregivers and the extended family. I mean, it had, you know, I'm a bean counter, and I appreciated the fact that it kind of drew attention to, how much money is lost, in productivity and revenue just from the disease. So again, as you're looking at that recruitment message, I should have made bigger deal out of this. Look what's in it for the donor. And if you had like the HIV, you could very easily approach, I would think, that from the angle of, absenteeism, the impact. I know it's changed in years, but the impact it had on the mortality of young people, the burden it places on your medical resources of the community. My goodness, think of the opioid crisis. I mean, the amount of money that's consuming right now that could be going to other things that we need done in our community is staggering. And then from that to the gentleman in the back, if it's one of those kinds of issues and it has an impact, on the medical community or, food deserts, hunger or poverty, then I would encourage you, if you're looking for people to fundraise, look at the governmental related organizations and other businesses and things that are focused on trying to address similar types of causes in the community, and then find a way to collaborate. And then eventually, like I say, you do the education, you identify the players around the issue, and eventually you'll find your fundraisers. I'm convinced of that. What you won't do is you won't find them by sending form letters. And as you probably can tell, I have a little bias against form letters because they're very impersonal. I get form letters from the bank offering to give me more credit, so that I can be more debt. If I'm going to support your cause, I want to get to know you a little better. Other questions? Yes?
So for example, so now you kind of just changed what I was going to do for 2020.
So I made you change your mind. That could either be a good thing or a bad thing. If it's a bad thing, just do like most of the people know me. If it's a bad idea, just ignore it.
No. I think it's good that I'm here, so it pertains to asking both of you. My daughter was killed, unfortunately, and she had rescue. So I started Sophie's Companion for veterans. So I pulled dogs from Humane Society, different places, preferably before they're euthanized, have them trained for PTSD veterans, disabled. So my thought was, I was told by 3 of my advisors that are veterans, do a 1-page, request at different companies. So now I'm feeling like you would say they might toss it. So when I thank a company, I usually send them a video of what their money's gone to. Like CareSource sent us a very nice check, so I sent them pictures of the dog being trained for that veteran, exactly what their money went to. But to get the donation, what should I really do now? Not the
Well,
request?
there, and Kiwi and I discussed this too. There are a million ways of going about this. So the first thing I want to say is nothing that we've said is the only way.
Right.
If you're number one, if you're doing that, the first thing that came to mind for me on a personal donation level is if you could. I don't know how VFWs and American Legions and these veterans organizations work, but I was in Kiwanis, at one point in time. If there are opportunities, to speak, to a member, what I would do is go and speak at as many of those as you can. More importantly, if you can take a veteran with a dog, with a companion animal, and let them speak, I think that emotional, how do we appeal to their feelings, goes up, significantly. And then I think you mentioned a video and pictures and other things of that nature. If you're getting in front of that business owner, the only thing I'd ask you to try to think about maybe and explore is having some statistical type of information. I mean, we all know Fairborn's very close to here, for example. How many folks are in the military at Wright Pat? How many are working for, in jobs and things in the community that support the military. How important is, how important are the veterans, to our community? And then just the things I hope we would all share is, how do we get back and make their transition back into the civilian world?
But how do I get that company, though, to donate or give a grant or get their employees involved, which some companies have, but they've just come to me after we won the Eclipse Award. They wanted to be a part, but how do I get more companies to, without doing the letter thing?
Outside of doing the letter, I would ask for personal meetings. And more importantly, and we do this with LLS, you may, rather than me or a board member doing the ask, there may be an informational component here. You want to actually take an animal with you or whatever the case may be. But if you can find other board members and things that are have some degree of visibility in the business community. And then I'll go back to what Paul said about his capital campaign. You may be in that scenario where if you're trying initially to build the interest, if you can find a stakeholder in your organization that can help facilitate an introduction. And that's the message that I want to leave you with today. And that is good, bad, right, or wrong. And we have one of our fellow board members named Donnie. And pretty much Donnie just doesn't shy away from it. He said, I support LLS. And when it comes to supporting, the walk in the event, I ask my vendors. I want a check from all of you. Now, some people might say that's a little heavy-handed. Me, I applaud the guy. I mean, this is important to me, and if my business and our relationship is important to you, then you need to consider, getting on board and getting behind it. So I think you just reach out to your volunteers to facilitate those introductions, and you may not get in to see the top person, but a lot of those large corporations will have a community liaison kind of function, or someone who does community outreach and marketing. You might just start with those and get an internal gatekeeper to help you get in front of them.